The forest knows you, every shadow between the oaks, every path through the undergrowth, every stream that cuts through the ancient earth your ancestors walked for generations, before Rome ever existed. And this knowledge is your weapon, because the legionaries marching toward you see only darkness and danger where you see home. You are Cherusci. Your name means the people of the stag, and your father taught you to hunt in these woods before you could walk properly, showed you how to move silently through the bracken, how to read the forest like Romans read their scrolls. And now those lessons will determine whether your people remain free or become slaves to an empire that demands taxes in silver you don't have and obedience to gods you don't worship. Your brother died 3 winters ago on the Rhine frontier, fighting for Rome as an auxiliary soldier because that's what the treaties demanded, what the chieftains agreed to when the legions first came with their promises of peace and prosperity. And his body was never returned, never given proper rights, just listed as a casualty in some Roman record keeper's wax tablet, like he was inventory, like he was nothing. The Roman governor they call Varus has been collecting taxes all summer, Roman taxes on Germanic land, as if conquering a place means you own not just the territory, but the people's labor and their harvests and their very souls. And the old men in your village mutter that this is worse than the raids we used to suffer from neighboring tribes, because at least those enemies we understood. They spoke our languages. They wanted plunder, not submission. You remember when Arminius came back from Rome 7 years ago, wearing Roman armor and speaking Latin like a native, and some called him a traitor, said he'd forgotten his people, but you saw something in his eyes during the feasts, a hardness that hadn't been there before, a quiet rage he kept hidden beneath his Roman manners. He was taken as a hostage when you were both children. You remember the day they took him, his mother weeping as the Roman cavalry escorted him south toward a world none of you could imagine. And when he returned, he was changed, educated, disciplined, made into a Roman officer with citizenship and equestrian rank, but still Cherusci beneath the armor. The gathering started 2 months ago, secret meetings in the deep forest where the Romans never ventured, where Arminius spoke to the chieftains of the Bructeri, the Angrivari, the Marsi, all the tribes who had bent the knee to Rome, but never forgotten what freedom tasted like. And his words were careful, calculated, Roman in their precision, but Germanic in their fury. He told you about the empire's weaknesses, how the legions are trained to fight in open ground with their formations and their discipline, how they rely on roads and supply lines and predictable terrain, how they're terrified of the forests because forests can't be conquered with engineering and organization, only with intimate knowledge of the land itself. Your cousin asked, why now? Why not last year or next year? And Arminius explained that Varus is not a soldier. He's an administrator, a tax collector with 3 legions under his command, who doesn't understand warfare the way Tiberius did, the way Drusus did, those earlier Roman generals who were actually dangerous because they respected their enemies. Varus thinks the province is pacified, thinks the chieftains who bow to him are loyal, thinks the auxiliary troops from your tribes will fight for Rome when the moment comes. And this arrogance, this assumption that conquered peoples stay conquered, is the crack through which you will strike. The plan is audacious, almost insane, because you're not just ambushing a patrol or raiding a supply convoy, you're targeting 3 full legions, 17,000 professional soldiers, plus cavalry and auxiliaries, the 17th, 18th, and 19th legions, who have conquered Gaul and Spain and a dozen other lands, whose eagles have never been captured in living memory. But Arminius knows something the Romans don't, which is that a legion in the forest is not a legion on the battlefield. Stripped of their formations and their cavalry support and their artillery, they're just men with shields, trying not to trip over roots in the dark. And men can be killed, especially when they don't know they're walking into a trap. The summer has been long, deliberately peaceful. Arminius playing his role as loyal auxiliary commander while secretly moving warriors into position, spreading false reports of rebellions to the west that would require Varus to divert his march, ensuring the column would take the forest route where the ambush waits. You've spent weeks preparing the killing ground, building hidden earthworks along the trail, clearing escape routes for your warriors, identifying choke points where the column will stretch thin and vulnerable. And every night you wonder if this is madness, if you're about to throw away your life attacking the most powerful military force the world has ever seen. But then you think about your brother, about the taxes that left your village with barely enough grain to survive the winter, about the way Roman soldiers look at Germanic women, about the governor's proclamation that soon your people will be civilized, which is just another word for broken, and the fear hardens into resolve. The morning of September 7th arrives cold and gray, and you watch from the tree line as the Roman column begins to move, a serpent of steel and leather winding through the landscape, and you can hear them from half a mile away, the jingle of armor and the creak of wagon wheels, and the officers shouting orders in Latin, completely oblivious to the thousands of eyes watching from the shadows. They camp that night 16 miles from their starting point, their usual efficient camp with ditches and palisades, and you could attack them there, but Arminius says no, be patient. Wait until they're deep in the forest where their discipline won't save them. And so you wait, cold and hungry and terrified, clutching your spear and wondering if you'll survive the next 2 days. The second morning comes, and you see what Arminius meant. The column entering the heavy forest, stringing out as the terrain forces them into a narrow path, cavalry unable to scout ahead properly, wagon trains struggling over the muddy ground, and the first attacks come from the Bructeri, not a full assault, but harassment. Arrows and javelins from the trees, quick strikes that kill a few soldiers and then fade away before the legionaries can respond. You watch a Roman centurion screaming at his men to form up, to create their defensive formation. But in the forest, there's nowhere to form. Just trees and mud and Germanic warriors appearing and disappearing like ghosts. And you see the fear in their faces, the realization that they're in country that doesn't obey Roman rules. The rain starts, heavy and cold, turning the path into a morass that sucks at the soldiers' boots. And some wagons get stuck, others are abandoned, and you can see the column fragmenting, gaps opening between the vanguard and the main body and the rear guard, exactly as Arminius predicted, because he knows how Romans think, how they'll try to maintain order even as chaos swallows them. By afternoon of the second day, you're given the signal to engage, and you emerge from the underbrush with 50 other warriors, screaming your war cries, throwing your framey spears at the nearest legionaries, who turn to face you with their shields up, but they're slow, exhausted from a day of marching in the rain and fighting off constant attacks, and your spear takes one in the throat before he can even raise his gladius. You've killed men before, in raids and feuds, but never a Roman, never a legionary who was supposed to be invincible. And as he falls, you feel a savage joy mixed with terror, because you've just made yourself an enemy of the empire, and there's no going back now. The fighting is nothing like the stories make it sound. There's no glory or nobility, just mud and blood and screaming, men slipping and falling and getting trampled. You lose sight of your companions in the chaos, and suddenly you're facing two legionaries who have their shields locked together. And you remember what Arminius taught you, that shields are useless if you can get around them or pull them away. So you fake an attack from the front, and your cousin hits them from the side, and suddenly they're dead, and you're moving forward again. The Romans tried to establish a camp for the second night, but it's pathetic compared to their usual standards. Barely any ditch, no proper palisade, men too exhausted to dig properly, and you can hear them inside arguing in Latin, some wanting to break out north toward Allied territory, others insisting they continue west toward the Rhine. And the lack of clear leadership is obvious because their governor is in over his head, an administrator trying to be a general. That night, you don't sleep, None of the warriors sleep. You're too close to the Roman camp and too afraid they'll attempt a night breakout, but also too excited because Arminius says, "Tomorrow is the end. Tomorrow we finish this." And you want to believe him, but you've seen how many Romans there still are, thousands of them, and even wounded and demoralized, they're still legionaries with professional training and equipment. The third morning starts with news that Varus is dead, killed himself rather than face capture, and this sends a visible shock through the Roman ranks. Men who had been holding themselves together through discipline, suddenly realizing they're leaderless, that the emperor's representative has abandoned them. And you can see the panic spreading like disease through the column as they begin their final march. You're positioned behind the earthwork that your people built over the past weeks, a long berm of dirt and logs that blocks the western path. And when the first Roman cohorts reach it, they stop, knowing it's a trap, but having no alternative, because behind them, Arminius is bringing the main force, thousands of Germanic warriors who have been shadowing them since the forest began. The centurion leading them, a man named Chionius, according to prisoners we'd taken, sends 2 cohorts to clear the barricade, and this is when you strike, erupting from concealed positions along the earthwork. And the Romans who thought they were attacking a defensive position suddenly find themselves in a killing box, warriors above them throwing rocks and spears, warriors flanking them from the woods, and they break, actually break, disciplined Roman legionaries turning and running. You chase them back toward their main column, and that's when you see Arminius for the first time in the battle, mounted on a captured Roman horse, his auxiliary cavalry mixed with Germanic nobles, and he's not giving orders in Latin anymore. He's screaming in Cherusci, calling on the gods your fathers worshipped, and his men crash into the Roman rear like a hammer. The slaughter is total, methodical, brutal, and you're part of it, killing men who have dropped their shields and are begging for mercy in broken Germanic. And some part of you knows, this is what Rome has done to 100 other peoples. This is what they did to the Gauls, and the Iberians, and the Dacians. But that knowledge doesn't make it easier, doesn't stop your hands from shaking when you finally stop swinging your sword. By midday, the last Roman resistance collapses. Officers are captured and dragged away for sacrifice. Common soldiers are being enslaved or killed, depending on their usefulness. And you stand among the carnage trying to process what you've done, what your people have done. Because you've just destroyed 3 Roman legions, 17,000 of the empire's finest soldiers, and taken their eagles, their sacred standards that are supposed to be inviolable. The eagles are displayed on poles, surrounded by the heads of centurions, and the old men perform the rites to Woden and Donar, thanking the gods for victory and offering the blood of Roman officers to ensure future prosperity. And you watch the rituals feeling disconnected, exhausted, unable to celebrate because you know what comes next. Rome doesn't forgive, Rome doesn't forget. The empire will come back with more legions and more generals, and they will turn this forest into a graveyard trying to avenge this defeat. And your victory today has just ensured that the war will continue, will escalate, will consume more lives on both sides until one or the other is destroyed. The captured Romans are separated into groups, officers taken for ritual sacrifice because that's what the traditions demand, what the gods require for such a significant victory. And you watch as they're led into the sacred groves where the priests wait with their knives. And some Romans face death with dignity, others beg or weep or rage against the barbarity of it all, not understanding that from your perspective, this is justice. This is what defeated enemies deserve. This is how you honor the gods who gave you victory. Common soldiers are distributed among the tribes as slaves, which is also traditional, also expected, and you claim none for yourself because the idea of owning another human sits wrong with you, even though your culture has always done it, even though Romans do the same to captured enemies. And you wonder if this feeling makes you weak, or if it makes you different from the cycle of violence that has defined the frontier for generations. The battlefield itself is a nightmare. Thousands of bodies already bloating in the September heat, armor and weapons scattered everywhere, and your people are stripping them methodically, taking everything of value, gladii and shields, and chainmail that can be reforged or repurposed. Because your tribes aren't wealthy, don't have the resources to waste, and Roman equipment is better than anything you can make yourselves. You find a young legionary, barely older than you, still alive but gut-wounded and beyond saving, and he's calling for his mother in Latin, the same word in his language and yours, and you give him water and stay with him until he dies, because leaving him alone seems cruel, even though he's your enemy, even though he would have killed you without hesitation if the battle had gone differently. The celebration feast that night is raucous, warriors drunk on beer and victory, recounting their deeds and showing their wounds, and Arminius is lauded as a hero, the man who brought the tribes together, who used Roman training against Rome itself. And he accepts the praise, but you see the calculation in his eyes, already thinking about what comes next, about how to maintain this coalition now that the immediate threat is gone. Your chieftain, old Segestes, who argued against the rebellion from the start, is conspicuously absent from the feast, and rumors say he tried to warn Varus about the ambush, that he's been detained to prevent him from undermining the victory. And this worries you, because tribal politics are complicated, because Segestes has kinship ties to half the Cherusci nobility, and because betraying a betrayer might just lead to more betrayal in an endless cycle. The next morning you're assigned to the cleanup, collecting Roman equipment and burning bodies before they rot and spread disease. And it's grim work, made worse by the realization that many of these dead men were auxiliaries, were Germanic warriors from allied tribes who fought for Rome because their chieftains had made treaties. And you recognize faces, distant cousins and trading partners, men you'd shared drinks with at markets, now dead because they chose differently than you did. Arminius calls a council of all the tribal leaders, and you're allowed to attend because you distinguished yourself in battle, because you killed at least 3 legionaries and survived without serious injury. And the meeting is tense, everyone aware that they've just committed an act that Rome will never forgive. The Marsi chieftain argues that you should press the advantage, should cross the Rhine, and attack the Roman forts while they're still reeling from the news. But Arminius shakes his head, explains that attacking prepared fortifications is suicide, that your advantage is mobility and knowledge of terrain, that you should fortify your own territory and prepare for the inevitable counterattack. Some argue you should send envoys to other tribes, should try to create a pan-Germanic alliance that could resist Rome permanently. But you know this is fantasy. The tribes have been fighting each other for centuries. Shared language and culture aren't enough to overcome old feuds and competing interests. And the only thing that united you against Varus was immediate threat and Arminius's personal charisma. The Roman prisoners who weren't killed are being interrogated, and you translate for one of them, a supply officer who speaks some Germanic. And he tells you that Augustus is old, that the emperor might sue for peace rather than waste resources on revenge. And you want to believe this, but you don't, because empires don't become empires by accepting defeats gracefully. News arrives from the Rhine forts. Roman survivors from Varus's column who managed to escape have reached the garrisons, and the frontier is in chaos. Commanders unsure whether to abandon their positions or dig in, whether more Germanic forces are coming, or if the ambush was an isolated incident. And this uncertainty is almost as valuable as the victory itself, because it paralyzes Roman response. You're sent on patrol, checking the forest paths for any remaining Roman stragglers, and you find a small group, 5 legionaries, who've been wandering lost for 3 days, and they surrender immediately, too exhausted and hungry to fight. And you bring them back alive, because killing unarmed men feels different than killing them in battle, feels too much like murder. Your mother asks if you're all right, if you were hurt, and you lie and say no. But the truth is, You have a deep cut on your thigh that's starting to fester, and you're having nightmares about drowning in blood, and every loud noise makes you jump, and you don't know how to talk about any of this because warriors aren't supposed to be affected, aren't supposed to show weakness. The weeks pass and autumn deepens, and there's no Roman response, no legions marching from Gaul or Raetia, and some people start to believe that maybe Rome will accept the loss, will pull back to the Rhine and leave your lands alone. But Arminius knows better, tells anyone who'll listen that the empire is just regrouping, just waiting for spring when campaigning season starts again. Traders from the south bring news that Augustus was devastated by the defeat, that he's recalled Tiberius from retirement to handle the crisis. And your heart sinks because Tiberius is not Varus. Tiberius is the general who nearly conquered Germania before, who knows the terrain and respects Germanic warriors, who won't make the mistakes that Varus made. The chieftains argue about strategy, some wanting to fortify positions along the Rhine, others advocating for a defensive strategy deep in the interior, where Roman advantages in organization and logistics mean less. And the lack of consensus worries you because united you could resist, divided you'll be conquered, tribe by tribe, the way Rome always does it. Winter comes, and with it a respite. No campaigning in winter, both sides huddling in their settlements and waiting for spring. And you use the time to train, to practice with your captured Roman gladius, to learn the formations that the legionaries use, because knowing your enemy's tactics might save your life. Your sister marries a Bructeri warrior, one of the men who fought in the ambush, and the wedding is a celebration, but also a political alliance. Arminius quietly building connections between the tribes, using marriages and fostering agreements to maintain the coalition he forged in blood. The Roman prisoners are being integrated into your society, some as slaves, others as skilled workers if they have useful trades. And there's a blacksmith from Gaul who's teaching your people how to work iron the Roman way. And you're not sure if this is victory or defeat, if you're preserving your independence or just absorbing Roman culture differently. Spring arrives, and with it the news everyone feared. Tiberius is coming with 8 legions, not to conquer, but to punish, to restore Roman honor and make an example of the tribes who dared to destroy imperial forces. And the numbers alone are terrifying, because you barely managed to defeat 3 legions under ideal conditions. How do you resist 8 legions commanded by Rome's best general? Arminius calls another council, and his plan is not to fight, not to give Tiberius the battle he wants, but to retreat, to abandon the border regions and fade into the deep forests where the legions can't follow, to make the land worthless to Rome by removing the population and burning the crops. Some chieftains refuse, say they won't abandon their ancestral lands, and there's talk of fracture, of some tribes making separate peace with Rome, and you can see Arminius's coalition crumbling even as the Roman threat grows. You're assigned to a raiding party, one of many being organized to harass Roman supply lines, and it's different from the ambush, less organized, more desperate, and you lose men to Roman cavalry patrols who are now expecting attacks, who have adapted to the threat. The raids continue through the summer, but they're not enough. Tiberius's advance is methodical and cautious. He's not giving you the opportunity for another Teutoburg. He builds fortified camps every night, keeps his forces concentrated, doesn't venture deep into hostile territory, and slowly, inexorably, he's pushing your people back. The Bructeri make peace first, their chieftain accepting Roman terms in exchange for keeping his lands. And this triggers a cascade, other tribes deciding that submission is better than destruction, and Arminius is left with a shrinking coalition of diehards who would rather die free than live under Roman rule. You're at the meeting where Segestes finally escapes his detention and flees to the Roman camp, taking his daughter Thusnelda with him. Thusnelda, who is Arminius's wife, and the betrayal is personal and political and devastating, because Segestes is a respected elder, and his defection to Rome legitimizes submission, makes it seem like the honorable choice rather than cowardice. Arminius is furious, wants to attack the Roman camp to rescue his wife, but the other chieftains restrain him because it would be suicide. And you watch your hero, the man who defeated Varus, reduced to impotent rage, while his family is paraded before Roman soldiers as proof that even the great Arminius can be humbled. The years blur together, season after season of raids and retreats and negotiations and betrayals. And you're not young anymore. You have scars and a limp from where a Roman pilum went through your calf. And you've killed more men than you can count. And you don't feel victorious. You feel tired. Arminius is still fighting, still rallying those who will listen. But his coalition is a shadow of what it was. Many tribes have made peace with Rome, have accepted tributary status and auxiliary quotas, and the dream of a free Germania united against the empire has faded into might have been. You hear that Germanicus, Tiberius's adopted son, has come to the frontier with 6 legions, that he's demanding the return of the lost eagles, and there's talk that the Romans have found the Teutoburg battlefield, that they've discovered the remains of Varus's legions still scattered in the forest, and Germanicus performed burial rites for the dead. And this gesture, this acknowledgement of their sacrifice, makes you feel strange, almost guilty, because those were men too. They had families and hopes, and they died terrified in a foreign land. The eagle of the 19th Legion is recovered by the Romans, found in a Bructeri shrine, and the loss is symbolic and real, a sign that Rome is reclaiming what was taken, that the victory at Teutoburg is being slowly undone, and you wonder if it was worth it, if all those deaths accomplished anything permanent or just delayed the inevitable. Your son asks you about the battle, wants to hear the story of how you defeated the legions, and you tell him a simplified version. Leave out the fear and the confusion and the moral ambiguity. Give him heroes and villains and a clear victory. Because maybe he needs to believe in something. Maybe the next generation deserves better than the complicated truth. Arminius calls on you less often now. You're not part of his inner circle, just another aging warrior with too many memories. And you hear he's having problems with other chieftains, accusations that he wants to be king, that he's trying to establish permanent authority rather than the traditional rotating leadership. And the irony isn't lost on you that the man who fought against Roman tyranny might be trying to create his own. The news comes in the year the Romans call 19 AD. Arminius is dead, killed by his own kinsman who feared his ambition. And you don't know how to feel because he was your hero and your general, and possibly a would-be tyrant. And maybe all 3 things can be true at once. Germania never unites, never becomes a kingdom that could rival Rome. The tribes return to their old patterns of feuding and raiding each other. And Rome eventually pulls back to the Rhine, not because you defeated them, but because the emperor decided the territory wasn't worth the cost of holding. And you're not sure if this counts as victory. You grow old watching your grandchildren play in the same forests where you killed Romans, and the empire is still there across the Rhine, still powerful, still threatening, but also unchanging, a permanent feature of the landscape that your people have learned to live with. The traders still come, Roman goods still flow into Germanic lands, your people still serve in the auxiliary forces, and sometimes you wonder if the only thing Teutoburg accomplished was making the occupation slightly less direct, replacing governors with treaties, replacing garrisons with alliances, but keeping the fundamental relationship of Roman dominance intact. You visit the battlefield once, decades later, and there's almost nothing left. The forest has reclaimed everything. Scattered bones are all that remain of the thousands who died there, and you leave an offering to both your gods and theirs, because the dead deserve respect regardless of which side they fought for. Your grandchildren ask if you're proud of what you did, and you tell them yes, because refusing to fight would have been worse, because resistance mattered even if it didn't succeed, because your people stayed free in their own way, keeping their language and customs and identity even while accommodating Roman power. The empire would eventually fall, centuries after your death, not to Germanic tribes united, but to Germanic tribes fragmented, wave after wave of migrations that would reshape Europe. And maybe Teutoburg was the first crack, the first proof that Rome could bleed, that the invincible legions could be beaten if you fought smart and exploited their weaknesses. But you don't know this, can't see the future. All you know is that you survived, your people survived, and the children playing in the forest are free in ways that matter, speaking your language, worshiping your gods, living by your customs, and maybe that's enough. The last time you tell the story, you're very old, speaking to a grandson who wants to join the auxiliaries, who sees Roman service as opportunity rather than oppression. And you try to explain that both things can be true, that Rome is enemy and partner, threat and trading partner, and the world is more complicated than the simple stories would have you believe. You tell him about Arminius, about the planning and the fear, and the 3 days of slaughter in the forest. And you tell him about the cost, the friends who died, the nightmares that never quite fade, the moral weight of killing men who were just following orders, just doing their duty to their empire, the way you were doing your duty to your tribe. You tell him about the eagles, those sacred standards that meant everything to the Romans, and how taking them felt like breaking the empire's spirit, like proving that no power is permanent, that every hegemon eventually falls. And you tell him that this lesson is worth remembering even if you end up serving Rome, especially if you end up serving Rome. He asks if you regret it, the rebellion, the battle, the years of war that followed, and you think carefully before answering, because the honest answer is complicated. You regret the deaths, regret the suffering, regret that the victory didn't lead to lasting independence, but you don't regret fighting, don't regret choosing resistance over submission. And maybe that's the best anyone can hope for. The forest still stands, ancient and knowing, and you walk through it slower now, your warrior's body betraying you with age, and you remember running through these same trees with a spear in your hand and terror in your heart. And you think about all the men who died here, Roman and Germanic, and how the forest doesn't care, doesn't judge, just grows over the bones and continues. You die in winter, surrounded by family, and your last thoughts are not of Rome or rebellion or politics, but of simple things. The smell of pine resin, the sound of your wife's laugh, the feeling of sunlight through the forest canopy. And you hope that whatever comes after death includes forests, because you can't imagine existence without them. Your grandson, the one who joined the auxiliaries, survives his service and returns with stories about the Rhine frontier, about how Romans and Germans live side by side now, trading and intermarrying and blending into something new. And maybe this was always how it would end, not with conquest or resistance, but with gradual merging, two cultures becoming one. The story of Teutoburg lives on, told and retold, exaggerated and simplified, turned into legend where brave Germans destroyed the proud Romans, and the complexity is lost, the moral ambiguity, the fact that victory didn't bring freedom and defeat didn't bring slavery, just different forms of accommodation. Centuries later, a German nationalist movement will claim Arminius as a hero, will build monuments to the battle, will use it as propaganda for unification and resistance to foreign powers. And you would probably hate this, hate seeing your complicated, desperate fight turned into simple propaganda. But the dead don't get to control their legacy. The eagles that were captured are eventually recovered, the 19th found by Germanicus, others retrieved through negotiation or theft, and they're returned to Rome and placed in temples, sacred relics of a disaster that shocked the empire but didn't destroy it. And this might be the real lesson, that even catastrophic defeats can be survived, absorbed, learned from. The Roman frontier stabilizes along the Rhine and Danube. Germania Magna remains free but fragmented, never conquered but never truly independent either, always influenced by the empire, even in resistance. And maybe this is as close to victory as any people can get when facing a superpower. Your people remember you as one of the warriors who fought at Teutoburg. Your name is mentioned in songs and stories, though always secondary to Arminius, always part of the supporting cast. And this seems right because you were never the hero, just a man doing what seemed necessary at the time. The forest grows, the rivers flow, the seasons turn, and Germania changes slowly, adopting some Roman technologies, resisting others, maintaining identity while adapting to reality. And life continues because life always continues, regardless of empires and battles and the grand sweep of history. The final accounting is impossible, because how do you measure victory? Do you count bodies or territory or cultural survival or simple endurance? And by different metrics, the battle was both crushing triumph and tragic waste, both necessary resistance and futile gesture. You killed Romans and they killed you. Rome withdrew but didn't fall. Your people stayed free but not independent. And the world continued turning, indifferent to your struggle. And maybe that's the hardest truth, that even the most significant moments of your life were footnotes in larger patterns. That Teutoburg mattered deeply to those who fought there and barely at all to history's long arc. But it mattered to you. The choice to fight mattered. The decision to risk everything rather than accept subjugation mattered. And even if the outcome was ambiguous, the choice itself had meaning, had dignity, and that's what you hold on to in the end. The stories your grandchildren tell their grandchildren will simplify everything. Will make heroes and villains out of complicated men. Will turn 3 days of confused forest fighting into an epic clash of civilizations. And the truth will be lost. But maybe that's acceptable. Maybe every generation needs its myths, its simple stories about resistance and courage, even if the reality was messier. You fought, you survived, you lived to see your children grow up free in their own way. And whether that freedom was real or illusory, whether Teutoburg changed history or just delayed the inevitable, you made the choice to fight rather than submit. And that choice, that moment of agency, in a world that usually offers none, is worth something, is worth everything, is the only victory that truly matters when empires rise and fall, and the only constant is human dignity struggling against long odds.